Good morning, everyone. Wonderful to see all of you here. We're incredibly delighted to have the CMS Administrator, Dr. Mehmet Oz, with us, and HHS Chief Counselor, Chris Klomp, with us as well. We have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to dive right in. It's been about a year, a little over a year, Dr. Oz, since you've been in role. I remember us being here at Global Conference last year. You talked about CMS and HHS being open for business. You talked about your sets of priorities, how Medicare, Medicaid are intended to really help the vulnerable population. You talk about it from the perspective of Humphrey and the Humphrey Building, and those of us that are at the beginning of life, and those that are in the shadows of life, and those that are at the twilight of life. As you think about the last over a year and the work that you've done, you've rolled out so many different initiatives, open technology, many others. How would you talk about your success? What are your accomplishments over the last year?
Well, we have OKRs, objectives and key results, and so there are ways for us to keep score. And those objectives and key results include things like being the best payer, because we wanted to lead by example. I think we have done that very well. We've made some important changes in how we incentivize people, particularly in value-based scenarios where people are paid to do better and provide better outcomes, not just to do tasks. That's a process that takes a while, and that's a major focus. For that to happen effectively, you need to use technology. And we have a real concern about AI because we need to move towards it quickly, but America doesn't really want AI, it seems. And so that's something that Chris is spending a lot of time that I love him to dive into. We very much wanted to crush fraud, waste, and abuse. I think most of you followed that news, which it takes a while to ramp up because that program, the integrity program, was gutted. And I want to applaud Kim. Where's Kim Brandt? Kim, stop hiding back there. Come over here. Come up here, Kim. Kim actually... She's chief operating officer of the entire organization, and she runs and rebuilt that element of Agenda Pays here as well. We've been making major inroads. We had a very clear workflow towards making America healthy again, which I know we'll talk about in a bit. But let me just define it for you. Making America healthy again is about making it easier to be healthy in America. And if 80% of the costs of Medicare and Medicaid are driven by chronic illness, you have to deal with the upstream pathology that's leading to people being chronically ill with obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and all the downstream problems that result from that. Or you're not going to catch up. That's why we're twice as expensive as any European country per capita in healthcare. We're twice as fat. We're 10 times heavier than Japan. So that's not a mix. And the last topic, which is the one we should speak the most about, is affordability. And that is the major theme that I think most Americans are resonating around. It will be a very big issue in the midterms. And I think a lot of Americans are worried about the affordability of life in general, but healthcare affordability is a very different type of problem. It's not like you can't afford eggs or you have to defer buying a car. Basically, if we can't give you healthcare, then we're challenging whether or not you actually own a piece of the rock. You don't want to have a scenario like we were experiencing until some of these most favored nation pharmaceutical deals where 1 in 3 Americans walk into a pharmacy and walk out empty-handed because they can't afford their medications. And Chris Drove is the mastermind with John Brooks and Inma Hernandez making some of those most favored nation drug pricing recipes come to life. But it only happens if the agency believes that its power to convene is powerful enough to actually scale, and that's what we've tried to do.
And when will Americans see the difference in their everyday access to health care, the affordability issue that you talked about, as they go and interact with their physicians, the clinicians, the overall healthcare ecosystem? You were not here on Sunday, but I shared a slide on Sunday with a survey that Gallup did, and the vast majority of Americans feel they have access to low-quality care. With all the reforms that you're trying to implement, how will we feel the difference if those are working?
Let me give Chris a chance to talk about most favored nation drug pricing because it's the most concrete example of Trump RX. But then I want to come back and address it more forthrightly, that question, because it's vital.
Chris, over to you.
Look,
so he's going to give you the hard questions.
There we go.
He does
now you see our working
lifting.
relationship. Look, you've got a $5 trillion ship that's U.S. healthcare. It takes a minute to begin to turn. Pharmacy is an interesting one because we can turn that a little bit faster. MFN is an interesting example of that. You've got 27% of Americans, over 1 in 4 Americans, who show up to the pharmacy counter and they don't pick up their prescription because of a lack of ability to pay. They turn away. That's a moral failure. That is at the root of the most favored nation drug pricing policy. And already we're seeing real changes. In fact, in the coming weeks, we'll announce kind of what we've calculated as the initial savings of the first 4 months since Trump RX launched. But I'll hit on a couple of points. If you're trying to conceive right now and you're using fertility drugs, you're saving about $2,000 per cycle, or just under $6,000 per baby as a family now, immediately. Those are real savings for a family. If you're paying GLP-1s, you're saving a couple $1,000s a year. Your cost has been halved already, and that number is continuing to come down as a result of those agreements. We will continue to see that happen as every new drug comes onto the market and prices at MFN, which is not a price cap itself. It is simply saying that America will no longer subsidize global free riding. But that's one microcosm example of many different affordability initiatives that we're focused on.
All right, let's talk about what's in your portfolio. So you have this title, Chief HHS Counselor. What are you responsible for?
I'm responsible for overseeing the day-to-day operations of the Department of Health and Human Services. I took this role about 9 weeks ago. I've been working with Dr. Oz overseeing the Center for Medicare over the last year. And the mandate from the president is very simple. It is to say, what are the things that are most important that we should be focused on as a country, leveraging this massive department, which is the largest department, I think, on the planet, and how do we make sure that we have the people, the processes, and the systems aligned to do our best work in pursuit of those objectives. Dr. Oz talked about affordability. That's a crisis we have to solve. We inherited it, but we have to solve it. How do we hold the bad guys accountable? So it's fraud, waste, and abuse, but that definition is actually pretty broad. It's not just thievery, it's inefficiency, it's low-value care, it's all the things that ultimately take from one pocket into another, but don't distribute value commensurate with that transfer. It's focused on nutrition and fitness. And how do we actually engage that? How do we make that something that people want to do? We've been prescribing diet and exercise in the primary care physician's office for decades. How's that working out with a 74% overweight rate, a 43% obesity rate in the country? Maybe we reframe that conversation. Maybe instead I sit and talk to the patient and say, well, what is it that are your goals? What are your hopes and dreams? Do you want to be able to carry your grandchild longer? Do you want to be able to hike up a mountain longer without running out of breath? Let me help you reach those goals, something that's personal, something that's personally motivating. And then fundamentally, it's answering one very simple question. It's one word: why? Why is it so hard to be healthy in the United States? Why is it so difficult, or so easy rather, to be unhealthy? What is the root cause of the fact that 6 in 10 Americans face a chronic disease? Why is it that my family, half of us, have some sort of a chronic condition that we're battling? Why? And how do we fix that? And that is the root cause of everything that we are doing, because it turns out the best care that unlocks the full potential of every American so that we can unlock the full potential of our country is the care that you don't need. So it's prevention, and it's investment in prevention.
Let's talk about fraud, waste, and abuse. That's been a priority for you. You've been traveling around the country. You talked about program integrity. You referenced your team and your staff that are working on this all over the country. What's your aim? What are you trying to achieve within this program? What are you trying to root out? What have you identified to date? And what does that actually mean for Americans? How are Americans thinking about this campaign against fraud, waste, and abuse?
So there's a moral element to this, because if people are willing to steal your money, they'll steal your health. There's also an affordability component of it. If I, with the team, could get rid of the fraud in Medicare, and we believe the total Medicare, Medicaid together, just those programs, is about $100 billion a year. But if we just took the Medicare fraud out, we would double the life expectancy of the Medicare Trust Fund, which means any of you who are worried you're going to work your whole life and Medicare won't be there for you, which is the majority of people, these turns out, we can give you more confidence that will add years more to the trust fund, which of course gives you much more flexibility. Now, why is it that the corruption at the base of all this problem of fraud, waste, and abuse is so important for us to root out? Let's just take this city. There are hospices that are very well functioning around this country to take care of people at the last months of their life. I say months because they were designed in the early 80s for cancer patients. Theoretically, you'd pass within 6 months. You give up your regular Medicare benefits to be on this program. Great social contract. Everyone thinks the world of it. 1/3 of all the hospices in the entire country are in Los Angeles. Not California, Los Angeles. How many of you live in Los Angeles? Are there that many people dying here? Like, what is going on? How is that even possible? And the reality is, there was evidence, even state auditors, California state auditors were indicating 4 years ago that there was massive fraud based on research even from years before that, and there just wasn't this serious effort to get their arms around it. When you don't deal with this kind of fraud, you actually incentivize, you entice doctors to start selling their license, their soul, to dishonestly claim people are going to pass. Businesses flow rapidly into this area. And you start to see such rampant fraud, and COVID made it worse because COVID taught a lot of people that you could steal. Now, here's the bigger problem. What if it's not a flaw of the system, but it's a feature that you have this kind of fraud? How is that, you might say? Well, let's take New York State, leave California alone. New York State, the #1 job in the whole state is personal care services. What does that mean? It means most of the new jobs are going towards people carrying groceries upstairs for their parents or transporting a neighbor to the doctor's office. In normal circumstances, your family would do that for you anyway. You wouldn't pay for it. But if the federal government is now paying for that, it's a jobs program in New York. And then those new jobs, which are paid for by the federal government, create tax revenue for the state. And then I add the one layer more, which is the unions. The big union in New York State is now unionizing these people. So, and that union, those dues now flow back into the party they support, so it's political patronage. It undermines the foundation of a program that Chris, Kim, Jen, we all love deeply, which is Medicaid and Medicare. These are programs that are the social foundation of our nation. All great people take care of their most vulnerable. We cannot allow them to be bankrupted. And I'll leave you with one last thought. Do not think these are small-time operators. These are organized criminal syndicates weaponizing at scale these fraudulent activities. We have the Cubans involved in South Florida, where we have twice as many durable medical equipment suppliers as McDonald's. Right? That, Bobby's not shutting down McDonald's that I'm aware of. So that's a massive I just mentioned hospice here in New York. Those are 3 good examples for you, but we see them in many areas. Autism services, which are primarily owned by private equity. That's not a problem in itself. But if you're starting to change the natural way that you would deliver these services, you have to get cautious about it. And so we have to look at these more carefully.
And how do you respond to criticism that it's leaning much more to blue states versus red states?
Well, we have gone after Florida hard. That is, last I checked, a red state. Maine is a purple state, went after them. But yes, we went after New York, California, and Minnesota. I don't know if those governors are more tolerant of this because of electoral politics. Maybe they're not willing to make some of these more challenging decisions. But we wrote a letter last week that Kim drafted to all states asking them to revalidate their providers. What does that mean? Are the people doing these services allowed to do? Are they capable of doing these services? So Minnesota, for example, has told us that they haven't, about 20% of the people who are providers haven't responded. I don't know if that's going to be the case in every state, but we asked every state, red and blue, to tell us what their plan is to revalidate providers. But if, in fact, 1 in 5 people don't respond to your letter, that's a bad sign. And the 400 hospices that we initially stopped payment on, suspended payments for in California, which we've already done in the last 10 weeks, the initial 400, we did not get complaints from. Yeah. So it's a problem. We can get our arms around it. It's a very clear need of the nation. This should not be politicized.
Yeah, so we'll restore the integrity of the programs. That's what you're trying to do. Yeah. There will be some savings as a result of these enforcement actions. Are you going to reinvest those savings into what Chris talked about with regard to prevention and technology and helping you make your life better?
100% that is our goal, to reinvest the money. It's American taxpayers' money, and we want to reinvest it in a lot of areas, including rebuilding the 1979 COBOL, the billing system of CMS, which, you don't have programmers who know how to program in COBOL. So, but tell them what else they want, which includes AI, for example, and this Chris, by the way, built a very valuable company, which he exited from and came to serve in government, like others, like Dan Brillman and others. They've been very successful in the private sector. So they are patriots coming to serve. And I'll just admit that you have to divest everything you own. My kids, my wife Lisa's there. My oldest daughter Daphne's next to her, just spoke, by the way. Daphne is an adult. So I can transfer assets to Daphne and that's okay. His kids are children. I mean, they're young. So he had to make major sacrifices. When you have people like this come into government, it makes you very proud, which is why we're here, because we're recruiting. Anyone who comes to the Milken conference could work in government.
Many of you didn't know. We're passing out job applications on the way out the door.
So come on down, relatives, loved ones, people that you don't like that you think could help us. Doesn't matter. We're hiring 1,000 people. Okay, AI.
Okay, no. Before we talk about AI,
he can't help
losing control of the interview.
No, I before we talk about AI, which I do want to get to, Chris, what I do want you to address, and thank you for answering those questions, is really around the role of U.S. competitiveness. That's an issue that we've been focused on, certainly here at Milken. I think about the last year where we had those initial proposed cuts to NIH 40%. We talked about cuts to FDA. HHS lost 20% of its staff. We have research expertise that's being drawn to other countries. We see the rise of China in R&D development, early phase 1 trials that are much more accelerated in countries outside of the US, Australia, China, as an example. So as you think about how the US is going to be positioned to continue to be a leader on medical research, on innovation, what is your perspective from your vantage point and how we can secure that leadership role, not just for the country, but for the world?
It's interesting. We talk about all the challenges in healthcare, right? It's growing twice the rate of GDP. We're the sickest that we've ever been, 6 in 10 Americans, chronic disease. But I think that healthcare is an optimistic story. And I think U.S. competitiveness is an optimistic story because I bet on America. I bet on American exceptionalism. I bet on the fact that we have the greatest healthcare system on the planet in the history of that planet. I bet on the fact that we have most of the greatest scientists on the planet working here, conducting the most bleeding-edge research. It starts at the NIH. We solve problems that are seemingly intractable. We move to the FDA, and on the statutory basis of safety and efficacy, we clear those to the market. We move it to CMS. CMS figures out how to pay for it. And then CDC is there, frontline, to make sure that if something starts to go wrong, we stop it quickly. That is the U.S. healthcare system in a nutshell, supported by hundreds of thousands of extraordinary individuals, all underpinned by this notion that when you back the United States into a corner, we're our best. And I think that we've been backed into a corner. We're at an inflection point right now. And we tend to come out fighting, and we do it in an extraordinary way, but we need to do it with a focused plan. And so that is what we are focused on right now, which is we don't have unlimited resources. But for those that we do, how are we deploying them at the NIH, for example? Not against interesting esoteric ideas or things that may or may not yield fruit, but strictly dollar for dollar, how do we alleviate human suffering? What are the problems that are most facing us in chronic disease and otherwise? And how do we ensure that we'll drive, as best as possible, a return on investment in that regard? From an FDA perspective, how do we move from 15 years from concept to commercialization to under 5? How do we make it so that it doesn't cost billions of dollars to bring a new molecule? How do we leverage new technologies like AI to speed the drug review process? How do we go from 2 trials to 1 trial to continuous trials? How do we do that all without compromising safety? All in the mind of, if we don't, we risk losing a multi-trillion-dollar economic engine that is the leader in biotechnology, that is the biotech industry, to a potentially adversarial nation that will then control what gets made and who gains access. I don't think we want that. I don't think anybody wants that. So again, because healthcare shouldn't be partisan and isn't partisan, if you go on either side of the aisle, it doesn't matter. We can all get around the idea that we have a common goal, a common objective, which is we have to do better. We have to embrace technology. We have to reduce bureaucracy. We must maintain the sterling principles of safety and efficacy and public trust that have underpinned these institutions for decades, led by extraordinary career scientists and other leaders who have dedicated their lives to the pursuit of truth and public service. But again, around a focused mission. That's where we're deploying our dollars. That's what we're doing right now.
What it sounds like is you understand the problem. You understand the priority.
Acutely.
Yes, and the urgency of the solutions, and this is going to be a priority.
You can't not. When you had China producing 3% of molecules a decade ago, and they're producing close to 40% of molecules now, when 50% of all molecules being acquired by pharma today are originating in China, you can't not pay attention when they're running 4 times as many clinical trials. And the risk of that is that we lose our best scientists that bleed out from our trial sites, which happen to be our best academic centers of excellence. You have to understand the gravity of this problem, and we have to rally around together as a country.
Very quickly, I want to talk to you about USPSTF. You talked about prevention being a huge area of priority. We're spending $5.3 trillion on healthcare. We have a task force that's responsible for evaluating the best technology, the best evidence, and making recommendations for what should be covered for screening for U.S. adults and children. Is that task force being reconstructed? How are you thinking about the future of USPSTF and really helping drive that agenda on prevention?
Yeah, I'll borrow an Ozism, which is if you're sitting on a riverbank and you're watching the bodies float by, you can continue to pull each body out if they need help, or you can walk upstream and figure out why are all these bodies falling into the river in the first place and what am I going to do about it? That, in a nutshell, is what preventive health is. That is prevention. So that's what we need the Preventive Task Force to do. So yes, it is being reconstituted. We have a July meeting on the books. We plan for that to meet. We're excited about that work in the same way that we are making investments, monetary investments in prevention. Dr. Oz, through the CMS, through Center for Medicare last year, shifted for the first time a significant percentage of our budget neutral reimbursement from specialty care to preventive care. Why? Because for decades we've talked about it, but no one actually does it and picks those fights. We have to invest in prevention.
Amazing.
If I can say one thing about prevention, because you guys have the power. Amy Braun, stand up if you don't mind. Amy touches the lives of hundreds of thousands of kids with a program that goes into high schools and mentors them in a way that is incredibly effective. There are private sector tools that we should be taking advantage of, like the one Amy runs, that would allow government to scale faster, which I want to just come back to this one thing because it's critical. Yeah. One big difference I think you'll find with HHS now is we can make laws with Congress, we can pass rules and regulations, but the power to convene, which means working with you and getting you to come on board with us, is incredibly effective. And listen, there are bad apples out there. The total quote that Chris was offering there, it's actually from Mao. And he said, if you stand by the side of the river long enough, the dead and bloated body of your enemy will go floating by. And he said, of course, that's a harsh indictment, but I actually think that the vast majority of people don't want that to happen, are not the enemies. They're not trying to destroy the system we have, but we built incentives into it that are so tempting, whether it's corruption or avoidance of prevention. I'll just give him, we're going to do an event next week on this topic. Many of you have never been to a school since you graduated from school. But if you go back and look at an elementary school, you'll notice that children are given milk, but not full-fat milk. This is a good example. And why is that? Because fat's bad for you. That was the food pyramid. Fat's bad. You take the fat out. When you take the fat out of milk, it becomes skim milk. It tastes like water. Kids don't like that. To make it palatable, you add chocolate syrup. That's what kids get. Chocolate syrup, skim milk, not whole-fat milk because it's better for them. And that's the kind of stuff that the Secretary has gone after in a very aggressive way. Build rules that are more tangible, that make sense, doing the same thing in fraud, waste, and abuse, by the way. Put in solid rules and law enforcement will come help you. You put in vague, unclear boundaries, and you end up with mud. And that's why working together with you, with the private sector, is so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that since the beginning of your time in this administration. We are getting the flashing light for us to...
What does that mean?
To wrap up.
Please
break the commercial. Now a word from our sponsors.
This flashing light. Well, I will say that all of us are heartened by your leadership at CMS and Chris with your new role at HHS, and we obviously wish you much success in all that you're doing. As we wrap up, what can we expect to see from you in the next 12 to 18 months?
And
Start with you.
Yeah.
Please.
Unbridled focus on quality, because the most expensive thing we do in medicine is bad quality care. People are not capable of doing things, treating cancer without the right tools and tests, as Mike Milken's spoken to frequently, causes lots of downstream problems. You have to hire someone really good to fix those problems, and you still have downstream complications to manage. So we are focused on quality, and we believe technology can help us get there.
I'm focused on trust. The American people want to trust their institutions. They want to know that when they hear something, a new food guideline, the dietary guidelines, they hear something from the CDC, they hear something from the FDA, they don't have to worry about it. We want to put the F back in FDA. It starts with food, right? I want the Medicaid mom of two who's shopping after shift not to have to turn the back of the box over and look at every single ingredient and wonder if the things that she's going to feed her children are safe or not. I want her to trust that the government did its job, that our agencies, our public institutions did their jobs, and that she can feed her children safely. That's the job. That's what I'm focused on.
Dr. Oz, Chris Klomp, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Esther.
Thank you, Esther.